All right, good morning, everybody. To those of you in the room here at the Emsel Auditorium, we welcome you in person. To those of you who are online via Skype, our able-bodied folks, Nick and Scotty up in the booth, will keep us all online and keep it running. And I would like to welcome you to the first of two workshops today, presented by Dr. William F. Carroll. Bill Carroll I'm happy to say, is a dear friend of mine, and we're very happy to have him back up here in the Pacific Northwest for the week. By way of introduction, Dr. Carroll holds a PhD in organic chemistry from Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. He received his MS from Tulane in New Orleans and a BA in chemistry and physics from DePaul University in Greencastle, Indiana. He recently retired from Occidental Chemical Corporation in 2015 after 36 years. He now heads his own company, Carroll Applied Science. He is also an adjunct professor of chemistry at Indiana. Bill is a member of the board of directors of the American Chemical Society, having served as chair of the board between 2012 and 2014. He's also a past president of the ACS back in 2005, one of three living members to hold both offices. He's very proud to be a fellow of the AAAS and the Royal Society of Chemistry. In 2009, he was also chair of the Council of Scientific Society Presidents. Bill has chaired numerous committees for industry associations and served on expert groups commissioned by the United States Environmental Program, the US EPA, and 3 states, including most recently the California Green Ribbon Science Panel. Bill has also received many distinguished awards, including Distinguished Alumni Awards from both Indiana and DePaul, and a number of ACS awards, including the Harry and Carol Mosher Award from the Santa Clara Valley section, the Public Affairs Award from the Chicago section, and the prestigious Henry Hill Award, sponsored by the Division of Professional Relations. The Division of Chemical Technicians also awarded Bill the Michael Shea Award. He holds 2 patents. He's got over 75 publications in the fields of organic electrochemistry, polymer chemistry, which is, I think, about the time I met you, Bill, combustion chemistry, incineration, plastics recycling, and popular music history. So this is also a plug. You're here in person and online in our Skype session for the first of 2 career workshops today. Bill will also be giving a public talk tomorrow, which will be very exciting. We will also be hosting it here at Emsel starting at 4 o'clock. The doors will open. And that's going to be a really fun public talk. But let's get to the business at hand for the day. For those of you who are online and on Skype, I will remind you, and those of you in the room as well, if you go to acs.labworks.org/calendar, you will pull up the Richland section of the ACS calendar that has all the Skype links. It also has all the downloadable files for both workshops today, including the PowerPoint slides that Bill will be using and presenting to work with you all. So please, if you're online, go and download those so you can have them in your repertoire. If you're here, download them when we're done. With that, I'm going to kick off and turn the podium over to Bill. This first session today is on resume construction, and the focus of today's workshop, and the reason we really reached out to our grad students and postdocs, and I really want to thank the POGO organization here at PNNL for helping get the word out to our grad students and postdocs here at PNNL. Because the focus of this workshop really is to assist you with your STEM career. Now, we'd like to think we're all going to have a 35-year career here at PNNL. Many of us, some of us will, many of us won't. And so, but we hope we can help prepare you for a long-term career in the STEM disciplines. So Bill will review the purpose and components and structure of a resume portfolio. And you're not going to get off easy. The handouts that you picked up when you walked in. There's working. This is a working session, folks. So we're gonna work today. We're also going to look at effective cover letters, and even though we're targeting this to our grad students and postdocs, everybody could use a hand in refreshing their resume. Too many of us let our resume go stale, and so we're hoping that the tools and tips and tricks that Bill will talk about today and lead us through will be useful for all STEM professionals to take a new look at resume construction and effectiveness. And with that, I will please welcome and let me turn the podium over to Dr. Bill Carroll.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you for the very generous introduction. We need to kind of get the slides up here.
Yes.
Of course, none of that introduction means anything to any of you all if at the end of this process we haven't done something that helps you to see your resume a little differently, to help you tune it up. I'm going to start from the assumption that each of you knows something about writing a resume because you're here. And what I'm hoping to be able to do with this is to perhaps give you some other things to think about that could be, how are we doing, Nick? Can you hear me? Are we getting any support here? This better? Okay. I'm going to assume that's a little bit better. All right. All right, so here we go. Let's kind of see what we're going to try to accomplish today. After we do this today, I'm hoping that you'll be able to do the following: to describe and analyze the various parts and sections for a resume. And I'm doing this with the idea of a resume that's going to go for an industrial kind of position. We'll talk a little bit about the differences between a resume and a CV in a minute. The format, the style, there are a million different ways of doing a resume. I'm going to try to show you some things that are at least one way that's reasonably easy to organize. To think about networking strategies, that's sort of the end of this, and how you learn to network, as Janet will attest, is totally important to the way your career will advance over time, and may be very important to finding the kind of jobs that are out there. And the goal is, of course, to think about how you could use these things either for a resume portfolio that you keep for the time that you use it and update, or for actively going out and looking for a job in industry. Now, let me just take a minute before we start to talk about the materials that we have. Both online and what you've had access to are a set of the slides. If you wanted, you could print them, you could use it for taking notes, or you could refer back to them, whatever, that's up to you, but I wanted to give that to you electronically. You have physically in front of you, you should have a couple of things. One is, and the most important of the two for the resume construction, is called the Personal Career Compass. There are things in here that we're going to be using as bits of information and working pieces for the workshop. So that also should be in front of you. There's also the most recent salary survey from CNEN done during ChemCensus. We'll use this a bit more in the industry module this afternoon, but I thought everyone who came should also have access to that. So what I'd like to do to start with is to give you an exercise, and please go to page 2 to start with. Because it's a small group here and because we're dispersed online, we're not going to form up groups. We're going to each act as individuals, a little more pressure on each of you, no partner to rely on. But what I'd like you to do is to simulate what goes on when people are looking at resumes. So you are on pages 3, 4, and 5, and 6. You have 3 resumes, A, B, and C. I'm going to give you 20 seconds to look at each of those resumes. And so are everybody positioned on Exhibit A on the first resume? Ready? All right, go. All right, switch to B, please. All right, now switch to C. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what we saw. Now, because you're such an advanced group, I gave you 20 seconds instead of 30 seconds. I'm also working under the assumption you've been doing this for a while, so you're pretty sick of looking at resumes, and you can only focus for about 20 seconds on these sorts of things. A, B, and C, which person are you calling in? Let's see a show of hands for A. Okay? All right, so I see one here, and you, against. Oh, no. No, which one are you asking to come in? And clearly not A. All right, we have one vote for A. How about B? Okay, we see 4 hands for B. What about C? Okay, so these 3 resumes are meant to show you different things, and we're going to talk about aspects of each of them. Generally, though, the best of the 3 is probably B, and we'll talk about why that is as we go forward. So here's something to understand. The purpose of a resume is not to get you a job. The purpose of a resume is to get you an interview. It's a marketing tool. It's a way that you can express to people who don't know you the things that you are about, both in terms of your technical skills and other skills and other sort of non-technical things that you want to get across. It's also a way of demonstrating your match with the job requirements. And this is a bit different than the purpose for a resume when I was getting out of school right after the last dinosaur died in captivity. The point was, in those days, you'd print up 500 copies of a resume and you would distribute them as printed copies. And so what you did, it was important that you got it right because it was never going to change. Today, every resume you send out will change, and it will be custom tailored for the jobs that you're looking for. Now, you're not going to make anything up about your background, but what you're going to do is change the emphasis depending on what the job specification asks for. And particularly in the working in industry part and a bit here, we're going to talk a lot about, over the course of the day, of how to tear apart a job specification and know how it should be to target both your resume and your cover letter. But more than anything else, you want this to be a communication that differentiates you from others. When you come into applying for a technical position, you can be sure that everyone who has been asked in is technically competent. But the question then becomes, what else are you bringing with you? Why would I be interested in you and not someone else? And that's something that always has to be in your mind as you construct this resume. So here are things that it is not. It's not a CV. Resumes are going to be 2 pages. CVs can be as long as you like. I've seen them 100 pages. For a CV, in academe, and I mean no disparagement particularly here for people in academe, but for a CV, you write down every time you take a breath. Every activity that you have is important for a CV, and that's why it can get to be so long. A resume is 2 pages, no more. I'll tell what I hope is a funny story. I was working with graduate students at another university, and one of them sent me a note that said, I'm sorry, I simply cannot get this down to 2 pages. I said, okay, here's my resume. I've been in industry for 37 years. I've had a reasonable career. My resume is 2 pages. Somehow I think you can do it. And but there's a reason for telling you this story. It's because you have a limited amount of real estate on those 2 pages. And your goal is to fill it in the most productive way that you can without cramming everything in. That's not the goal. The goal is to make it a readable, accessible document that utilizes the real estate in a way that maximizes the response that you can get from it. So here are some comparisons. What we're going to try to talk about in a resume is including an executive summary that may have some objectives, some things that you want to do, 2 pages, a list of your accomplishments that are focused on the position you're applying for and customized for each application. CV is a different story. The CV is a total record of everything that you've done and is not customized for a different academic application because those jobs are so very similar. You might take care of some of the differentiation in a cover letter. So one other differentiation between these two is if you're applying to jobs in industry, a resume is way more appropriate than a CV unless they tell you differently. And there may be a case where someone wants to see a more fulsome listing of your activities. That will be rare. I don't have a CV. I don't have a clue how at this point in my career I'd go about constructing one. So for me, it's if they need a CV, I ain't getting that job. Now, from the employer's point of view, what's a resume good for? Well, sometimes it's a negative thing. Sometimes it's more important to screen out the people that you don't want than it is to worry so much about the people that you do. Remember, if you put an ad out for a job, it's entirely possible, depending on the position, you could get 500 people responding back with resumes. Now, in many, if not most cases, there's going to be an electronic way of screening those resumes. And we're going to talk a little bit about strategies of what you do in order to maximize your probabilities with those electronic screeners. But imagine if you're a single human being reading resumes and you have 500 of them in front of you. Well, first of all, you're probably not going to take even the 20 seconds that I gave you to look at those first 3 resumes. But you're going to be looking for things that will allow you to put it in the no pile very quickly and winnow that down. Now, in some cases, it can be very simple things. And we may have this come up again in a later place. But if we're looking for things to winnow resumes, any typos, any poorly worded phrases will immediately disqualify you, at least for some people. And the reason for this, and people think this is harsh, and perhaps it is, but you've had forever to do a resume. There should be no errors. And if the care that you use in sending me a resume with errors is indicative of the care that you'll use while you're working for me, I'm not interested in you. So it's something to keep in mind, and it's one of the reasons why, as you do a resume, pass it around to other people, because it is absolutely clear this is one of those documents that you won't be able to see after a while. You won't see the typos. You won't see the syntax problems. It's good to give it to other people to read and to look at. The other thing that's true is the first 7 seconds are absolutely critical, because what's going to happen is, if someone is in fact looking at that resume, they're going to look what we used to call front page above the fold. And I'm looking for something that either interests me or disqualifies you very, very quickly. And about all you're entitled to is 7 seconds. So we want to have the stuff that your eyes are going to hit first, that has the stuff that's most interesting, that entices them to read further. So when you're doing a resume, these things are obvious. Specific is better than general. Concise is better than verbose. Accurate is better than creative. And if I might point out, lying on your resume can be discovered. This is a bit of a side note. One of the trade associations that I worked for recently hired someone for a position that was sort of an advocacy and communications position, and asked him for a writing sample, which he submitted. It turns out that after they hired him, he turned out not to be very good, and someone got the brilliant idea to see if his writing sample had been plagiarized, which it had. In essence, he bought a term paper and turned it over as his work. So the point is that sort of thing can be found, and it's important that what you advertise on your resume is in fact something that you can deliver. Now, you can put it in the best light possible, but they have to be deliverables. Now, when we do the industry part of this, we talk about the sweet spot for a job. We talk about the intersection of the marketplace with your strengths and your values. And the values part will be important. We'll talk a little bit more about that this afternoon. But the strengths part is what's going to show through directly onto your resume. The strengths, the technical strengths, are things that you're going to use in terms, first of all, of tearing apart a job spec, but second, in responding to what the job spec is interested in. And it's going to be in these kinds of categories. So technical strength, and that's going to be important for a technical job, obviously. But also, these other things are important. Leadership strengths, management strengths. I realize that we have people online. I'm going to try to be a little bit careful about verbal colloquy here. But give me a description of the difference between leadership and management. What does it mean? What's different about those two things? Anybody want to take a crack at that? Don't make me call on you. Go ahead. What's the difference between leadership and management? And I'll repeat it for the people online.
Okay, according to me, leadership in general, like if you are, like for example, you have one where you are leading a team team, right? So it can vary from 2 to say 5 people. So I think it's more localized in management. I think it's
Should we do this?
Yeah, the box is on there.
Box. Okay.
People online can hear you.
all right. So according to me, your leadership strength is how you are managing the people that are involved in a team.
So leadership and management are the
I
same
think
thing?
to me, there's a very thin gap. It's like you have to have the management qualities when you are leading the team.
Okay, let's get another opinion. We won't torture this too much.
I think a leadership strength is someone who guides the team in general. So focusing on operations activities versus managers where they do a lot of the mentoring, that personal time aspect that you have on the slide, and they work directly with.
So there's
with the
an
team.
aspect of those things that you both touched on. And I'm going to try to summarize it in a little bit different way. First of all, one is not more important than the other. They are different aspects, and you will need both. There will be times when you are a leader, and there are times when you are a manager. The things that you do when you are a manager is you are focused on getting the job done, where you are allocating time, you're allocating resources, and you're making sure that things get accomplished. When you are a leader, there are a couple of aspects to that. One is people are looking to you for an example. In many cases, it's how you do things, not exactly what you do. Another way of thinking about it is the difference between leadership and management is the difference between strategy and tactics. Wherein leadership, in many cases, will take a longer view, and management will take a shorter view. Both are necessary. And the reason I'm going through this with you is because you will find on job specs both things that speak to your ability as a leader and to your ability as a manager, and it's something that you need to be able to demonstrate in both cases. Now, if you look in your career compass, you'll see on the very first page, there's a worksheet to assess your strengths. And offline, I would urge you to use this to write down some things that will allow you to express your strengths in those 5 areas, including leadership and management. Now, probably the case is here as well. It is not so much when you were in graduate school, but in industry, there's a high probability you're going to be working on a team. And there's a very high probability that team will not all be in the same physical location. You may be working with people who are remote from you. In grad school, it's a different story, and you will all remember this. I can't give a degree to a team. I have to give a degree to you. So it's much more focused on what your individual capabilities are. But I want to know, if I'm hiring you for industry, I want to know what your experience has been here and how you work in a team and with peers in that area. And finally, your communication strengths. Can you speak? Can you write? Are you comfortable doing both? And the reason is because anything that you do that can't be communicated or doesn't get communicated doesn't count. It's not something that people can use. These are the kinds of strengths that we're going to need to work on. All right, so let's talk about constructing a resume, and we're going to hit these various aspects. The introduction, background, and supporting information. We're going to start with the introduction, wherein you have a heading, an executive summary, and we're going to spend a little bit of time on that. So the heading, what to include. This is your contact information, name, address, email address, phone number, a LinkedIn URL. Yes, please. You want to toss the box over, please?
I noticed that on the example resume B, the address was for a university. Is it typical to have the address of a place that you currently work at the top of your resume?
Yes. So let's. I'm going to get right to that. I want to.
Okay.
I want to flesh this out just a little bit more. Some people will include their home address. And that's okay when you're out, when you've been out for a while, it's okay to do that. But I think the thing that's most important is that you only need one address. You don't have to have a work address and a home address and 2 different email addresses and so on. Your physical address is a bit less important to me than if I simply know that you're here on planet Earth somewhere. Because I'm a little bit cautious about where I put my personal address. But you may, particularly, for people who are as advanced as you are, it will be more appropriate. Remember, this is general. We're talking here for people who are grad students and postdocs and so on. But one address, pick one address, and pick one email address, and you should have a professional sounding non-work email address. So, a Gmail address that reflects your name. I don't need to tell you this, but you can have cute email addresses. This is not the place for them. To the phone number, one phone number is sufficient. It's probably going to be your cell because that follows you. And a LinkedIn URL is useful because you will do a bit different stuff with a LinkedIn page than you will do with your resume, even though the two work together. So a LinkedIn URL is another place that people can go to get more information about you, and I think it's useful to include in that header. Now, the executive summary, it used to be that we taught people to write an objective for a resume. But that was back in the days when you had one resume and it was to work for all jobs. Today, you're going to tailor your resume for things, so the objective would boil down to, I'd like to have this job, please. Now, what we teach people to do instead now is called an executive summary. And what you want from an executive summary is a concise statement of who you are, what you're about, something about your strengths, and it's very analogous to something that Janet and I have a long story to tell about that I won't bore you with here, but it's about your elevator speech. So if I use the term elevator speech, do you know what I'm talking about? Could I see a show of hands for those who do? Okay, so what I mean by this for those who do not is if you had the opportunity to meet the CEO of the organization you're applying to, and you were riding up in the elevator with her, and that person said, tell me a little about yourself, what, in the 30 seconds that you have in the elevator, would you be wanting to say? Now, if it's the first time you've heard this and the first time you've thought about it, that might be kind of a daunting assignment. I'm going to urge you to take time from now on to write yourself an elevator speech. And it should be the sort of thing that if I wake you up at 3 in the morning and say, tell me a little about yourself, this is what comes tumbling out of your mouth. Not because you've memorized it, but because it is so core to what you do. It's your basic description of who you are, what you want, and what you can do. And it gets me grounded very quickly. Now, this flanging up your elevator speech with your executive summary makes a lot of sense. Because if your elevator speech is in fact that sort of thing that you would tell someone on a personal basis, it's also probably something that's worth telling people who are asking you about this by soliciting your resume. So there used to be objectives and highlights sections. A lot of that information can find its way up into the executive summary. What you're after here is about 3 to 4 sentences, and your elevator speech could actually be a little bit longer than that. But I think you get the point of where I'm trying to get to with the idea of an executive summary. So this is one example, and when I show you examples of things, they are meant to be illustrative. They are not meant to be the sort of thing that says you have to do it exactly this way. But for example, you could choose to have a statement of objective here if you saw that as being the sort of thing that said, here's where I'm going. But you also will want to have some highlights that says, here's what I've done. And so what I'm getting in one bite is a real snapshot about you. That's what the goal is for the executive summary. Now, this is one that I just kind of stole off a resume that I saw came into the place where I used to work. It's not perfect because you have all of this stuff as bullet points, and it probably is not the way you would want to approach it. But if you look at the size and content of the narrative part of it, it's not a bad approach to an executive summary. This is kind of what one looks like when you do it on a resume. So the real important part of this executive summary is it offers you a chance to present the entire package in one quick visual grab. Now, you're going to take a little bit of that same opportunity when you write a cover letter. But this is a way of grounding people with a very short summary on the resume itself. So some things that you might include are statements such as the following, and I'll let you go ahead and read these, but you'll see that each of them starts with some kind of thing that looks like an action. You'll see that each of these things is if you will, a guarantee. It says this is something I can do. Now, of course, these things need to be true to who you are and what you can do. So if you say you're a proven team leader with excellent interpersonal and communication skills, and the writing of your resume doesn't reflect that through, then I wind up with cognitive dissonance and I put your resume away. So it's important that what you advertise is in fact something that you can deliver on. And even almost to the point of if someone said, really, proven team leader, tell me what that means. You need to be able to back that with an example of a time when you've had that opportunity. We would talk about this more in the interview module, but it's those kinds of behavioral questions that you will get now more than anything else. Tell me about a time when. And coming back to the sorts of things that you have in your executive summary, that would be a great, kickoff, pardon me, for those kinds of behavioral sorts of questions. All right, so another kind of example, these are the skills, some of the skills that we've talked about, and ways of framing it. What you're talking about here is once again some sort of a statement of either your breadth, your depth, or a guarantee of what you can do. And this line is my addition. Be sure you can walk the talk. That's kind of the introduction and the executive summary. Now let's talk a little bit about the background. This gets to the point of where you've been and what you've done up to this point on a more factual basis. You're going to talk about your education and your research and work experience, and it's going to be a little bit different. If you're a grad student, the way you approach this is going to be a little bit different than if you're a postdoc, than if you are a seasoned professional. Because as you go along that spectrum, you go from having had a totally academic background to a mixed academic and work background as a postdoc, and you're kind of halfway in between. And then if you've got 5 years of experience, you're going to separate out the education part, and you're going to spend more time emphasizing the work experience. So it's kind of a continuum as you go through. But there are some things that are in common in both ways. First, when you talk about your education, you're going to do it in reverse chronological order. The last thing you did is the most important. I still have my educational bona fides on my resume. I just don't have my thesis title anymore, and we've moved way past that. But it becomes less and less important the further in the past it is. As far as early in your career, you're going to talk about it in this format: the degree, the field, the university, the location, the year. If it's relatively recent, you're also going to give your thesis title and your advisor, or you're going to talk about an area of expertise and an advisor. It's a bit different if you get out into a postdoc that is not an academic postdoc, kind of like this one, because there may be proprietary things that go along with this. On the other hand, in some cases, if you're very early in your career, it's useful to do this, because rather than me have to ask you for references, this is someone who I can ask about context, or I can use for context if I know who your advisor was when you got your graduate degree, or who you worked for as a postdoc. Some people list their grades. I'm not big on that. Grades were important when you were getting a bachelor's degree in grad school. They really aren't so important anymore. It's about your research. Yes, please. Could we have the box, please?
What about GPA?
Not worth it.
Okay.
Not worth it unless, to me, by this time that's buried so far back in your bachelor's career and your graduate career. I expect you to have very high grades, because that's the way grad school is. I mean, there's kind of a grade inflation in grad school, isn't there? I mean, you're not supposed to have a C. I damn near got one, so I know. And I'm not sure I wanted to advertise this. Could we throw the box up to the top, please?
Nice toss.
Well done.
I'm sure I'm not the only person here who may not have the best relationship with their advisor. In situations like that where you you've worked hard, you've earned a degree, but your advisor is perhaps difficult to work with, and you don't necessarily feel like they're going to give you a good review to a potential employer, what's a good solution for that?
Okay, you don't have to put it down. And I recognize that the situation you described can happen. So, but you have to decide how you want to deal with that. Because at some point or another, you're going to have to deal with it. At some point or another, I'm going to say, who'd you work for? And you're not going to be able to say, so what you're going to have to decide is you're going to have to say, I did my degree with so-and-so. And at some point or another, you're either going to have to say, we had different approaches to this, and frankly, our relationship was not the best. If we get to the point, and this would be an interview kind of thing, okay? If you get to that point, you can say, I would much prefer that you talk to this person, and this person who could give you perhaps a better view of my capabilities. But don't for a moment think that employer isn't going to call your old advisor. Because, to some extent, I want to know both the good and the bad.
Okay, that's a good way to deal with it. Thanks.
As far as your work experience is concerned, once again, same deal. What you've done most recently is most important. For those of you who are postdocs or who have an industrial experience beyond a postdoc, you can start separating those things out into being lower in the resume, but then you're going to have a professional experience category that talks about the jobs that you've had. You're going to want to talk about the dates, position, organization, and some key accomplishments. And we'll talk a little bit more about this as we get into it. But it's really important that you think about things that you've actually accomplished. So the analogy here is, if you're playing soccer, it's really important that I know that you can run up and down the field. But it's yet more important that I know that you can put the ball in the goal. So the thing that you want to emphasize are the times that you put the ball in the goal, when the actual results of things you accomplished, and not just actions. And we'll talk about that more as we go. And stating the accomplishments, beginning with a verb and describing the impact, that looks a lot like what we've seen in some of these other things, kind of like this. This is the way you're going to talk about your accomplishments in terms of the work as well, and that same kind of structure. Okay, so let's go back to the career compass, and I think we're going to be talking about page 8. There are some examples here. Of ways that you can talk about your education or your professional experience. Once again, this is one example. There are other ways of doing it. You may decide that you want to do it in a totally different way. That's okay. There's a million ways of doing a resume, and they're all correct and they're all wrong depending on how you want to look at them. And you have to be comfortable with them. Once again, those are structural sorts of things. It's the content that's important, and that you're able to transmit that content to me in a way that I can understand and use it. So this is something that I'm going to ask you to do on your own time rather than take time here. Take a look at each of the resumes and each of these background examples when you have an opportunity, and think about the order and how that and its education would appear if you were doing the resume in each case. And one of the reasons I'm not walking through this is because we have sort of a complex approach to doing this today, but I leave that as an exercise to the reader. Okay, other relevant skills. We've talked about your work, we've kind of talked about the accomplishments, we've talked about the projects. If you've worked on something proprietary, you're going to have to find a way of describing generally the kind of work that you've done. If this is particularly the case in industry, it can be very difficult to talk about your research background in industry because in fact it might be proprietary. On the other hand, if you have patents filed, if you have areas where you've given papers, if there are things that can be traced back to you, it's useful to use those things to be able to talk about what your research was in a way that doesn't violate some proprietary issues. But now once we're past that, here's places where we can now start to differentiate ourselves, and that's what your resume is for. You want to be able to talk about special techniques or particular instrumentation that you know how to use, unusual computer programs and languages. These are things, particularly if they are out of the ordinary, that highlight the particular skills that you're bringing along with you in addition to your work experience. So a way of thinking about this is particularly, if you are a computational chemist and there are particular kinds of software that you've used that are particularly applicable there, your proficiency with that software or those languages can be important. Your proficiency in various other techniques, and of course here you get the opportunity to work with lots of different techniques. But it's beyond the basics. It's not just IR, NMR, UV. It's very specific kinds of techniques that you've developed an expertise in, particularly if it distinguishes you from other people who might be applying for this job. All right, so once you've gotten past the background here, we get into the supporting information, and this is another place where you can differentiate yourself. Things like your awards or publications. Similar to publications but different are presentations, your professional affiliations. Here is where you will put your ACS membership. I want to see a show of hands. I couldn't come to town and not ask the question. ACS members. I highly recommend ACS membership. Janet, is that appropriate? Yes, thank you. Yes, please. Could we have the box back? Let's see how this goes. Well, so her question was, even if you're not a science major, the answer is there will be a professional society for your profession. And I'm here to tell you that one of the things that you do when you are a professional is you belong to your professional society, and maybe more than one. You may belong to ACS because it is the big tent for chemistry, but you might also belong to a society that has to do with your subspecialty. You could be an MRS member. You could be a spectroscopy society member. But what it tells me is that you are serious enough about your profession to be engaged with other professionals where you work. And by that I don't mean geographically, I mean in the field in which you work. Yes, I realize that anybody can be a member of anything if you pay the dues, but it tells me that it was important enough to you to do. So I'm a member of AAAS, the Royal Society, ACS, the Society of Plastics Engineers. All those things bore on things that I did in my career, and it says something, because of those societies, it says something about the way I approached the profession. We're going to talk a little bit more about references here. This is always kind of an interesting question. We'll get to that. So some parts of the supporting information. For awards and honors, it's useful to include the award, the date, who gave it, and what the effort was. When you talk about an award, it's useful to talk about what it was for. And so many times on a resume, you'll see that somebody won an award, but I have no idea what that means. I mean, winner of the Aloysius Debussy Jones Cup. I don't know what that is. So you want to include something that's at least a bit of context to say why that award is important. And because you have limited real estate, and you will find yourself doing this for almost everything that you have, consider quality over quantity, because you do have a limited amount of space to do this in. And as you advance in your career, you will be modifying your resume, and you will drop some things off, and you will add other things on as you accumulate them. Whether it's in publications or in honors or the rest, it's good to emphasize quality over quantity. So for publications and presentations, first of all, when you cite a publication, do it in a standard fashion. Do it the way you would publish in an ACS journal or another journal, and make sure that citation looks like something that you would get out of the back of a journal publication, so it looks correct. Some people have lots of publications. My advice to you, once again, on a real estate basis, is that you're probably going to want to list 3 or 4 that are your particular signal publications. Now, let's say you're lucky enough to have 15 publications. I've seen people try to list them all. Most people who have 15 publications, there's a certain sameness to, a lot of them. What you can do is pick the ones that are most prestigious, list those 3 or 4, and then you can simply have a sentence that says 11 more peer-reviewed publications, in similar fields, which gives me an indication of the quality by what you've shown me and the quantity by what you've told me. Patents, if you have them, are really very good, because in applying for an industry job, it tells me, first of all, that you're attuned to the idea of invention, and you're attuned to how those things get written and used. Presentations, presentations are more important earlier in your career, and particularly, when I'm talking to grad students, that's their first opportunity to publish if you haven't had first author publications with your professor. Now, as you go on further, if you are invited to give presentations, or if you give a TED Talk or something of this variety, it can be useful to include something about presentations. But once again, each thing that you put on your resume has to have a reason for being there. Why are you telling me this? Is it because it's important? If it's important, it should be obvious to me why it's important in those cases. So this is a place that I want to kind of digress. This is my part of the presentation. I want to talk a little bit more about making yourself stand out and why you would do this. Everyone who applies for the jobs that you're applying for will be technically competent. The question is, how do you distinguish yourself? Well, one way you can distinguish yourself is with absolutely transcendent technical competence. But since not all of us are Einstein or Linus Pauling, most of us have to find ways of differentiating ourselves that are a bit different. So let's talk about some others. In order to have this conversation with you, I need to give you your 5-minute MBA in chemical marketing. So how many of you have heard the terms commodities and specialties, just as a show of hands? So a working definition of commodities, commodity materials, are things that are typically made in high volume. They are generally of low price because of that high volume. They are typically not much transformed from their raw materials. They don't carry with them an awful lot of overhead with respect to marketing or research or the rest. They are meant to be made and sold in quantity, but most importantly, commodities are fungible. That is to say, commodity materials, one person's version is not discernibly different from another person's version. So as far as commodity chemical goes, chlorine, ethylene, these kinds of things, one person's is the same as the next. If we talk about it in terms of your everyday life, I like to think about gasoline. So you come up to a 4-way stop, there's a gas station on all 4 corners. Which one do you buy the gasoline from? Well, I hear cheapest, but there's actually a different determinant.
You turn right into it.
Exactly. Which one can you make a right turn? And nobody ever made a left turn into a gas station unless they were riding on fumes. And you know why? Because it's not one left turn, it's 2. So I'm here to argue that something that you buy on the basis of price or on the basis of it's on my right, that's a commodity. It's not a quality decision that you're making. All right, well, specialties are a bit different. Specialties are typically made in lower volume. They have a specific high technical value and typically a higher price. You may have more labor and overhead and marketing and so on in the cost structure. But most importantly, commodities are different from specialties because specialties are brandable. They are differentiated. They are not fungible. So my example here for specialties is coffee, right? You go to a Starbucks, you pay $2.55 for a 20-ounce cup of coffee. You go to the 7-Eleven and you pay $1.10 for a 20-ounce cup of coffee. So what's the difference between those 2 cups of coffee? I don't know. Maybe it's the taste. Maybe it's the Starbucks ambiance. Maybe it's what they put in it that makes it addictive and you have to go back there. I don't know. But it's something, and here's the point, because people who buy Starbucks coffee perceive $1.40 different value in use for that versus the alternative. That value in use, perceived value in use, is your brand. And branding is important. Now, we've talked about these 2 things. If you are a specialty, and you've established that brand, and you've established that differentiation, the next thing that happens is commoditization. And this is where your competition says, well, I see that Starbucks is getting an extra $1.40 for that cup of coffee every time they sell one. I'm McDonald's. I make coffee. Hell, why can't I get an extra $1.40 for that? So maybe what I can do, maybe what I'll do is I'll call it Nick Cafe. And I'm not going to charge you $2.55 for it. I'm going to charge you $1.70. So I'm going to tell you that I'm making coffee that's as good as Starbucks, and I can put it in your hand for less money. What's the process that's going on here? This is called commoditization, wherein I'm asking you as a branded specialty to compete on price, which makes you a commodity. And in every case, when someone establishes that kind of a specialty brand, someone feels that they can come and establish that and take it from them, and there's always price as a lever. Now, why am I telling you this? Because I'm going to argue that there's not just such a thing as commodity products and specialty products. There's commodity knowledge and specialty knowledge. And each of you is in the knowledge business, which is why it is important for you to establish a brand, to establish yourself as a specialty provider of knowledge. If your knowledge can be had anywhere in the world at low price, then you will be valued at that. So from here on out, your entire career, one of those things that you'll be working is to establish that you provide information that cannot be had everywhere and cannot be had on a price competitive basis. And that takes work. Establishing and maintaining a brand it's important, it's difficult, and it's necessary for you as a person working in the knowledge business. And I will guarantee you that you have been commoditized. If your knowledge is not unique, it can be sourced everywhere easily, and that what you cost matters more than what you can deliver, or if you happen to be on the right. So what kinds of things can we use to differentiate ourselves beyond technical competence? Well, so here are some things. Not just a depth and expertise, but a flexibility and breadth, particularly in industry. Flexibility is important because I may be asking you to do one thing one day, and then priorities change, and I come in and I need you to do something else the next day. One of the differences between working in academia and working in industry is in academia, you get to pick what you work on as long as you can get it funded. In industry, I'm going to ask you to do something, and I need you to get interested in it. And I may be asking you to do that differently from one week to the next, depending on what the exigencies are. It's not always like that. But your flexibility, your breadth, your ability to relate to other people in the organization who are doing things that are adjacent to you, those are important skills to me as someone hiring you for industry. And if you can demonstrate that in the work that you've done, that's useful to me. Tell me about a time when you had to be flexible. Behavioral and social competence. I may be asking you to take a customer out to dinner. I may be asking you to go to a customer's site and give a presentation. How you interact with other human beings, how you behave, as things as simple as etiquette. Do you know how to have dinner with someone? I mean, that seems very, very simple, but it's very important.
How do you put that in a resume?
The question was, how do you put that in a resume? I would probably not write competent to have dinner with other people. No, this is something that you have to be able to carry with you, and it will be more important in an interview. I'll get a better idea of how you act in an interview. But if you've had external contact from the labs, where you had to interact with other people at other places, it gives me an opportunity to ask you about that in the interview. Remember, once again, what's this resume for? The resume doesn't get you the job. The resume gets you an interview. And so everything that you do with a resume is keyed toward interesting someone enough to ask you to come in to have the conversation with them. So, can you speak? Can you write? Can you speak another language? I mean, think about it this way. You know, your ability to speak another another geographical language if you want to think that way. But you also have other languages. They can be computer languages. There are other skills that fit into this. Why is the ability to speak another language important? If it's not immediately obvious, it gives me an opportunity as an employer to put you into different circumstances because I'm expecting that we will be a global business, and there may be an opportunity to utilize those skills on a global basis. So those things are important. Have you ever worked with a team outside your own facility, or for that matter, in another country? One of the things that we'll talk about, in my sort of fun seminar tomorrow is a book I had an opportunity to write with a guy. We did this book over 15 months. He is a professor at the National Central University of Taiwan. We have spoken voice to voice once. We wrote the book totally by email. So it's a way of learning how you work 12 hours out of phase with someone who's doing something that's complementary to you. And it takes a while to figure out how to do that. If you've had experience, that's something that I'm interested in because many companies operate exactly that way with labs on different continents. We've talked about your ability to work in a team. Modeling. There is something of a mantra in a good portion of industry that says fail fast. And think of it particularly in pharma. In the pharmaceutical business, the last numbers I saw were that it costs about $2.6 billion to bring a drug to market. Now, to be fair, some of that is because of the time it takes, and some of that is lost opportunity to make money. But there's still a solid $1 billion of cost in that associated with bringing that product to market. So if I get 75% of the way there and fail, it is a hugely expensive error. So the more I can model, the more I can use other tools that don't require me to go all the way down the experimental track to get to that. There are advantages, but most importantly, it's fail fast if you can. Don't fall in love with it. Move on. If it ain't working, move on. Safety. You have a different safety ethic here at the labs than you would typically find in an academic environment. And people in academia are now learning more how important this is. But it's important to each of you as individuals. I'm sure you have felt that importance because you're working here. But what I tell grad students is if you can demonstrate that you have a background in safety, if you were perhaps the safety leader for your laboratory, that's an important differentiator. Professionalism. Part of that is your society, but part of it is the way you carry yourself as a professional. It's an intangible, but it's something that's useful to bring with you. And finally, when you get down to the point of actually talking to someone, are you really interested in this company? Have you done the work to know something about what they do? Remember, every human being sees the world through one lens, and that lens is me. So to the extent that you can help me know that you're interested in me, this is really important, and I guarantee you, it will differentiate you from most of the people who walk in the door. So the first kinds of things that you might do is think about these kinds of issues and brainstorm about the sort of things that might differentiate you from other people. Make some notes. Think about times when you might have done these things. And you're not going to do this in one sitting. You will, if this is top of mind for you, think, oh yeah, God, I did that. That's a really useful story to be able to tell because it points up how I did this. Start keeping a notebook of those kinds of things. Do a SWOT analysis on yourself: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It's going to be more toward the strengths and weaknesses part, but you're going to hear this term over and over as you go through industry. But think about it, not just a situation, but think about it from the perspective of yourself. There's another tool that we've recently brought out as ACS called ChemIDP. This is an individual development program. I'm not going to take the time to walk you through it at this point, but it is available. I believe it's chemidp.org. It is useful in helping you structure where you are and things that you need to do to get to where you need to go. And so I would recommend it to you to take a look. This is particularly for people who are early in their career, but it's also useful for people at your stage. For your resume, begin with the end in mind. if you are at the beginning of a 2-year stint someplace, let's just take that as an example. Ask yourself what you want your resume to look like 2 years from now. What sorts of things do you want to be able to put on there? What sorts of things do you want to be able to say that you are and have done that you aren't perhaps today? And then put yourself in a position to do that. For people who are in graduate school, as an example, I tell them, you're at a university. Can you go audit a business course? Can you do any other sorts of things that show that you have a bit more diversity than simply the degree that you do? For those of you here, it probably gets to be more of a skills thing, or it can also be a volunteer thing. If you want to differentiate yourself, you can join an ACS division. You can become part of people doing programming. You can develop your network in that way. But begin with the end in mind. So the way you tell your story, I like to use the word sparklers, which is to say, here are things that differentiate me from other people. Start keeping a list of sparklers that allow you to put something into your resume that someone doesn't get to see very often. So there are these 3 things I'd like you to keep in mind, and this is adapted from an absolutely wonderful book that I recommend to you. I don't get a cut of this. In fact, the fact that I've excerpted one of the chapters and given it to you, I've horribly violated copyright, and there may be hitmen waiting for me when I go out to Janet's car. But the point is, I'm trying to help this poor woman sell books. So the book Networking for Nerds is absolutely wonderful in terms of these kinds of things. And I'd like you to keep this in mind. Things that are important. Your brand. What is a brand? A brand is a promise of value, and it's not just a promise of what gets delivered, it's how it gets delivered. This is what I can do, and this is how I do it. And it's that way every time, and you can rely on it. That's a brand. And something to keep in mind from the other person's perspective is an acronym that I would ask you to tuck in the back of your mind, and that's WIFM. What's in it for me? I've known so many people in sales who had no idea why the person sitting across the desk from them would want to take the deal that's been offered. I mean, why would I even want that? What's in it for me? So think about it from an employer's point of view if you're sitting across the desk from that employer. What's in it for that employer to hire you? Well, one of the things that's important about that is because that employer can make more money with you than without you. It's not typically because you'd like to have the job, please. It's because I can do better with you than without you. So if you understand that, if you understand that the key question is what's in it for me, then you can orient the things that you say in a resume or the things that you say in an interview to help me highlight the fact that I can do better with you than without you, because you've looked at it from my point of view. Your attitude is absolutely important. It is how you carry yourself. Attitude, Janet, you probably appreciate this. People can smell it on you. They can smell it 50 feet away. If you're at a bad place in your life or a bad time in your life, and you can't somehow leave that outside the room, I will be able to pick that up within the first 5 seconds. So managing and understanding your attitude, particularly as you take it out for an interview, is extraordinarily important. And finally, is your reputation. And your reputation is strongly related to your brand. But it's developed over time, it's cultivated and curated. Google yourself, see what the web thinks of you. And if you find problems, and it's not impossible. I mean, Elena Levine gives an example of a woman whose name was very similar to a murderer. And people were confused as to which of the two it was. And her advice was simply start using your middle name, and every time you use your name, use your middle name with it. But the whole point is you need to differentiate yourself from that other person. You need to create a different reputation, and you need to start figuring out how to do it. And finally, your reputation is absolutely enhanced through the network, through the people who know you, who know your brand, who know your quality, and know what you can do for them. So, all right, so forgive me, that's a bit of a digression, but I hope there's some things in there that you can use, and some things that I absolutely hope you remember, and particularly the idea of developing and maintaining a personal brand throughout your career. All right, so we've been in the supporting information. What about some of these categories? All right, leadership experience. You can include some non-scientific activities that show leadership. Generally, you're going to do it in a science context. You're going to do that because you've taken a leadership position, perhaps in a laboratory, perhaps in your professional society. It is less important that you show that you take a professional position outside that. Although, if, for example, particularly when you're out in business, if you are an officer in a local service club, if you've demonstrated that your leadership skills have been put to use somewhere else, if it's relevant to the job, if it can be relevant to me, then it's worth including. President of the Young Democrats is probably not. That can be sort of value laden. You never know what you're going to get if you do that. So you have to exercise some judgment as to what sorts of things go into that. Professional affiliations or specialized training, membership in your professional organizations, we've talked about that, and also any specialized training or capabilities that fits in with things that we've talked about up to this point. It's another differentiator. Now, sometimes on a resume, you'll see the statement references available on request, modulated by what you asked me. I'm going to see on your resume, I'm going to see people that I will use as references because they will be people you've worked for before. On the other hand, references are less important for a resume than they are for an interview, and here's why. If you remember that your resume's job is to get you the interview, then I'm probably not going to spend the time or the money to do due diligence on you before I even ask you in and see if I'm interested. So then a lot of times you'll see people put references available on request. Well, okay, to me that's kind of Department of Redundancy department, because I know you'll give me, did you want the job? I'm going to need a reference. No, you can't have a reference. Of course references are available on request. I mean, why would you not? So I just think that the idea of references per se is not useful on a resume other than as they might be there by happenstance. On the other hand, lining up references as you get further on this process is absolutely critical. And it's important to understand what you want a reference to do. You'd like to have someone who will write something nice about you, but you really need to be a little bit more strategic about that. What you need to have is a list of references who can reinforce the points that you're trying to make in your resume. So whether they're technical skills or leadership skills or other skills, pick someone who is able to speak to your capability in those areas, and then talk to them about being a reference for you. And the kind of discussion that you want to have is to say, we've worked together. I wonder if I might use you as a reference. I'm in the process of applying for jobs. I wonder if I might use you for a reference. I would particularly like it if you could emphasize this part of our relationship. And you can be that aggressive. I mean, that's not terrible. Simply asking somebody to be a reference and not giving them any guidance on what you want them to say is unfair. So I turn it around the other way. When people have asked me to be a reference, I would say, what would you like me to talk about? Can you give me a set of bullet points that you'd like me to reinforce in the letter? It works both ways. And the further you go, there will come a time when people will be asking you to be a reference for them, and you'll want to establish that same relationship as to what's going to be said. So what the reference should do is identify the relationship to you, and then certain characteristics. I've had people who were graduate students who I met casually, particularly during the year I was ACS president, want me to write a reference for them. What I have to tell them is, certainly I could do that, but all I can say is I met you once. I can't say something substantive about you. Now, not every case is that stark, but what I would ask you to remember as you accumulate references is think about it in the same way as you use the real estate on your resume. Think about what references can speak most compellingly about you in areas that you want to have reinforced. So there's a bit more strategy to this than simply lining up references. Okay, what don't you put on there? Well, 40 years ago, it was not uncommon to include age, marital status, number of children, and so on and so on and so on. Now, there are cases where national origin might be important, particularly if you are applying for a job that would be a job that requires clearance. Citizenship might also be important in certain cases. My son is in the UK. He worked for a US company over there and left the company to go get an MBA at Cambridge. Well, when he comes out, he's going to need a visa to work there. I mean, it's no different than the situation that you see in the US. So that's the sort of thing that he needs to be upfront with a company who would be hiring him, is to say, I'm going to need a visa in order to stay in the UK and work. And it's the same way over here. It's important that if there's a requirement that your national status will impose on an employer, it will be important to have that discussion with people. Now, it can also work the opposite way. For Asian Americans with Asian names, it could be important to point out that you are a U.S. citizen. There could be a good reason for doing that. So for this is one, be careful. Generally, the answer is no. There can be times when it works to your advantage to include something about that. Your past salary history, that doesn't matter. And hobbies, unless, if you are on the U.S. Olympic team, then maybe I'm interested, because I think that tells me something about your leadership and your dedication to a particular field. That might be useful, but bridge club is probably not appropriate. So let's once again go back to the career compass and let's talk about resume B here. And I think we're going to page 4. So we're gonna use the box. I'd like to ask you as volunteers, tell me something that you see that resonates with you, something that has been done reasonably well in this resume. Stick your hand up if you have something. Go ahead. Can we want to pitch that back all the way to the back row again? I want to see this done twice. Pretty reproducible.
Nice. I really like the executive summary on this one. I thought that it was succinct, but also informative.
Most important is it tells you something about this person, that you know what you're getting without having to read the rest of the resume, but it might entice you to read the rest of the resume. What else? Anything else that you see in here that resonates with you after the discussion we've had?
All the accomplishments on the education and academic experience is well laid out.
Oops, there you go.
Yeah, go ahead.
Say it again.
Okay. In the education academic experience section, all the accomplishments they did were all bullet pointed and very clear.
So it's once again, it's easy to absorb that information. You get a real sense of what they're doing. Something else that I think is useful here. You notice the dates. There are months included as well. And this may be an old prejudice, but people don't like to see gaps in your resume. And it's one of those things that, yes, I realize that sometimes between your bachelor's degree and going to grad school, maybe you want to take a year off and do stuff. But if there is a gap in your resume, it's useful to be able to explain that you weren't simply in jail. Being unemployed for a year is not a bad thing. It's how you use that year. Were you working to find a job? Were you working to educate yourself? Find a way of not having a gap, because then that's one of the things for having the months included. If you simply have a year, that really allows for a year gap. It could be January of year X versus December of year X. So I'd urge you to use the months as you see there. Anything else come to mind as you look at it? This is meant to be not a perfect example, but a pretty good example of a resume. All right, we have one more in the back. Can you toss the box back there?
It's just 2 words: consistent formatting.
Okay, consistent formatting, and we're going to get to that in a minute because that's also important. So now, let's look at Exhibit A. Thank you for the setup. take a step back and look at Exhibit A on page 3. Tell me what you like less about that. Or for those of you who liked Exhibit A, tell me what you think is done well. How do you compare that to Exhibit B that you just looked at? Go ahead.
I've been told by some managers and some leadership that you want that one page because they don't have time to look at that second page. So on the one hand, it catches my attention right away, it gives me the bottom line up front. But on the other hand, you're not really specializing yourself. You're not differentiating yourself from other people.
So the point about being on one page, you don't want to use any more real estate than you have to. If everything that you need to say can be said on one page, okay. But at your point in your professional careers, you should have more than one page worth of good content. And I want to be clear about that. You should have publications. You should have awards. You should have leadership experience to include in that. Now, that's why some of that stuff goes on the second page. Because if it's there if I want it, it's not if I don't need it. That's why you want the important stuff front page above the fold that tells me whether I'm interested or not. And if I'm not, move on. A lot of people apply for jobs in the hope that someone will look at their resume, find something that's interesting, and call them. That ain't the way it happens. The way it happens is I'm looking for something very specific. If I find it up front here, I put it in this pile to look at a little bit more. If I don't, I put it in this pile that gets thrown away. And then when I go back to the pile that has things of interest, now I'd like to get a more fulsome story. And that's when I'd like to have more than just that one page. I want to get a little bit more of a rounded view of what you are. So the bottom line is 2 pages is okay. Make sure it's 2 pages of compelling content. If not, quality beats quantity. Other thoughts about A versus B? So let's talk a little bit now exactly. Yes, I'm sorry, go ahead.
They also have personal information on the bottom.
Yeah, well, not good. So A and C are meant to be suboptimal examples of resumes and they're the sorts of things that should stick out to you. Now, if we looked at C, something that should stick out to you about C is exactly this, is the formatting. We had the discussion about one page versus 2. That is modulated by where you are in your career. You want to use some kind of a standard font, and I would urge you to use only one font. And try not to go crazy with bold, underline, and italic, and shadow, and all the rest of the things that you can do. Each feature that you use should have a reason. And remember, those features only matter to human eyes. They don't matter to electronic eyes. So if you have something with a bunch of underlines and, gewgaws and gimcracks, it's only going to confuse the electronic reader. So be judicious about how you use those kinds of features and recognize that you're using them for a human eye and not an electronic eye. But because many of those human eyes will be older eyes, I would urge you not to go down to 8-point type. I did see a resume once from someone who had a master's degree that was literally, and I'm not kidding about this, 8 pages of 6-point type. And when I was doing a resume review with this person, I said, well, we probably want to start thinking about how to cut this down to maybe just 2 or 3 pages and work from there. I never heard from the person again. But the point is, old eyes want something that they can read, and it's also there's also a bit of a balance between white space and text. Generally, you want to have a 1-inch margin. Okay, maybe 3/4, but no less than that. But if you can do a 1-page margin, do it. Do your spacing such that it doesn't look crowded. I mean, and this is once again, you're doing this not for the electronics, you're doing this for the human eyes. But for the human eye wants to be able to have a look at it, pull out what is necessary, and get it in a hurry. That means that it shouldn't be all jammed together. It needs to be a bit looser than that. White or off-white paper, black ink, and generally, when you give this as an electronic file to someone, give it as a PDF, and the reason is because strange things can happen between different versions of Word. Now, I've seen strange things happen with a PDF as well, but it's a lot less likely with a PDF than it is with Word. So this slide kind of gets to the idea that maybe what you need to be doing is having a section of keywords of things that you want people to pay attention to, particularly if those people happen to be electronic. The computers have gotten a lot smarter over the last 5 years, and so lists of keywords are kind of out of style. What you want to do is find things that are important, and the keywords that you want that are important are those that are used most often in the job spec. So for those of you who are coming this afternoon to talk about the working in industry, we're going to spend a lot more time on what you do with the job spec. But for those of you who are not, try to read the job spec and read between the lines. If there is a job and they use a technical term 5 times, that's not an accident. They're telling you something about what's important to them. And so it should be your strategy in context of your letter or of your resume to read that back to them if you in fact have a competence in that area. And also in terms of the skills that you transmit, it's going to be important that you put that in the context of a sentence and not just as a list of keywords. So what the computer is looking for now is that keyword with the appropriate context that once again relates it back to the job spec. So this is just now if you were to take a look at C, and you don't have to tell me what you see there, but just kind of take a look at it and see if you don't see how bad it can look if you haven't formatted appropriately. Do you now see why this just doesn't look right at this point? And that's one of the things that you should take away. So now we talked a little bit earlier about a resume portfolio. And in this, portfolio carries 2 meanings. One is the resume part of it. Your resume is not one thing. Your resume is specific to whatever jobs you're applying for. So it will change a bit in order to emphasize one skill over another, depending on what the job is asking for. The portfolio part of this, your resume can actually be your resume seed bed, if you want to think about it this way. It could be more than 2 pages. You may include more stuff on there because there are times it will be useful or times that will not be useful. And then when you construct a resume to turn it in for a job, you're going to reduce it to the 2 pages and make sure that the stuff that's on there is what's most important. But there's another use for the term portfolio, and that is each time you apply for a job, you're going to be sending out information of various kinds. I would urge you to create a folder on your computer wherein you include exactly what you sent to various places, particularly because your resume will be different when you send it to different places. And if somebody gets you on the phone for a phone interview and says, I really like that part in your resume about this, it would be good to be able to look at exactly what you said and read it back rather than make it up as you go. So in that you'll include the job spec, your cover letter, your resume, any research that you've done on the company, and you're going to have it all in one place such that when there's a time to call it up, you've got it all there. I mean, these are all the basics, and I realize I'm talking to professionals here, so forgive me if that's a bit pedantic. But as you get involved in doing this, the organization will be important to you. You will find that there will be a point where you want to make sure that you've had it this way. So how does this electronic screening process work? And forgive me, this is a terrible time of the year for me with allergies, so I apologize for the hacking that you hear. I can only imagine. Here's how the electronic screeners kind of work. First, the resume takes all the styling stuff down as best it can, and it breaks the text down to words and phrases that it recognizes. How has the electronic screener been taught? It's been taught to look for stuff that's in the job spec. Now, I will grant you, not every job spec is a work of art either, but that's what you've got to work from. Then the desired skills or keywords or key phrases are matched against what comes in, and the resume is scored on relevancy using that sort of semantic matching to the terms. So this is one of the reasons why, in a way, you could think of this as being like search engine optimization, wherein there are certain things that you would like to have that particular search engine find about you, and the things that you want it to find are things that are particularly relevant to that job. So if you think about it in that sense, some of this makes a little bit more sense. I've included, where I've excerpted things from another source, I've included the reference here, and these are on the slides that are on the web for you. So it's not just the keywords, it's the semantic matches, and there can be different terms that are allied terms that you might use. Or, it might be looking for terms that not necessarily the company you're applying to, but companies in the same business. Perhaps it would be looking for those kinds of things. And here are some primary words: the job title, the description headlines, and particularly if it's used more than twice. And then the secondary words are kind of context words, which it might also have been trained to look for. So say, for example, if you're applying for a job at Dow, and in your experience you had worked previously for Occidental Chemical. Well, in some cases we are in competing businesses. That might be of interest to the electronic screener. This, once again, has also been adapted, and it's the same URL from before. So we spent a lot of time on resume. Let's talk a little bit about the cover letter. The cover letter is different from a resume, but the cover letter is meant to take all this stuff and put it in context. The best description of the way to do a cover letter is in three parts. About me, about the job, and the fit. So you might start out by saying a little bit about who you are, what you've done. In a way, it's kind of a derivative of, or perhaps an expansion of, your executive summary. And then you can talk a little bit about the job. This reflects that you've read the job spec. It says, here's what you're looking for. And then the third part is, and here's why I'm the perfect candidate for this, because I can do these things that fit very well with what you're asking for. So it's about me, about the job, about the fit. And in the end, don't be afraid to ask for the order. There comes a point where you would say, I would very much like to have the opportunity to discuss this with you in person, and you can talk about whether you want to follow up or not. So here's kind of a little bit more: the introduction. You can read this as well as I can read it to you. The body, and a conclusion. So now we've got an example of a cover letter in the Career Compass. If you go to, where are we? Page 10, please. Take a minute, read the cover letter, and tell me if you see things in there that you think are important, if you think it could be improved. Just tell me what you see as you read it. Okay, up to the top again, please. Could you pitch that up to her? Well done. I'm impressed with your catching skills as well. That should go on your resume.
Thank you. My throwing abilities are not quite as successful, I would say. One thing that I thought could be done better here is to pull out how the experiences in the second paragraph apply to the job in particular. Just from reading this, I don't really know what the job is in particular. It just says, I believe I have the skill set, without necessarily relating it specifically to what was requested in the job.
So that's a really good point, except what you also aren't seeing is the job spec. And the job spec, in my defense, I'm going to assume that the job spec asked for these kinds of things, because it is a job that it's an analytical chemist, but it's also very clear from highlighting the skills that this is going to be a big data kind of thing, because you're talking about statistical capabilities. And let me digress just for a minute. There's a way of adding to what you're advertising as your capability by the tools that you have. So, for example, I will tell people that saying you're proficient in Microsoft Office, well, in order to get up in the morning, don't you have to be proficient in Microsoft Office? Except for one thing, not everyone is proficient at Access. To me, Access is a very different kind of skill, and it says something specifically about your ability to handle data. Same thing with certain kinds of software. So talking about being proficient at SPSS or JUMP or any of the other statistical software tells me not just that you know how to use that software, but you know something about statistical analysis. So it's another way of filling out your picture by talking about the particular tools that you know how to use. So what you said is not incorrect. It matters what the job spec says. You shouldn't totally reproduce the job spec. You got one page for a cover letter. But the point simply is, what you talk about should be responsive to the job spec and why you fit it. Anything else? Any other observations? Yes, please. Bring around down.
Let's go halfway. Excuse me, sir.
The first paragraph indicates that person keeps up with the literature.
Yes.
And reads, what is it specifically?
Chemical and engineering news.
Right. The next thing I noticed is, from a text analysis perspective, is that they use the word I a lot. It's an indicator of a behavioral trait along the lines of narcissism. So, I mean, although this is a cover letter and you're showing that I did this, I did that, I think it's also important to keep in mind that how many times you use the word I.
Sure, and it's a good point, and I would feel differently about this if it were a different context. But I would ask you, what's the alternative? If the alternative is to speak only in sentences third-person passive voice, I don't like that. I think you've got a limited amount of real estate to get a point across. And this is kind of a specialized situation. What you've said is absolutely correct, and you have to be a little bit careful about that in a lot of writing. But this one, I mean, I am trying to get a point across. I can't say we, because you're looking at me. So you're in a way, you're kind of constrained. Of what you've said is yes, is good writing, but in this case you kind of have a specialized situation. So there may be a way of toning it down a little bit. At the same time, I've got this much space to tell you what I can do. So I think it can be forgiven. But it's a good point, and I appreciate that. Yes, ma'am. Up top, please.
Mine's more of a question. So in other resume review things I've seen, I've been told not to use phrases like most importantly and let the employer decide what's most important about your skills. So say what you have to do, but don't use your real estate to tell them what you think is most important.
It's reasonable advice. At the same time, I think it's, so once again, I'm going to go back to the beginning. There's a million ways of doing this. No one way is right and no one way is wrong. When I'm making a case, I want to make sure that you understand what I think is important about how to put this together. And so if I'm writing that, I may say, I think it's important that you understand how we fit here, because I do. If I lost the job because I said, most importantly, I didn't want the damn job anyway.
Okay.
I mean, there comes a point where so much of this is fine structure that there are some things that are really important. Care and being correct about doing stuff on your resume, that's one thing. Things that are stylistic, there's a bit more leeway on that kind of thing. So I'm not telling you that course was wrong, and I'm not telling you it's a bad thing. If it makes you uncomfortable, don't do it. I'm the kind of guy that says, I want to tell you what I think is important here, because that's how I work. And if you don't like that, you don't want me. Now, in some cases, you might be asked for a research summary. There is an example of a research summary that's also included in the career compass. Generally not in industry. You're generally not going to be asked for that. You will be doing a seminar if you can. Coming out of an academic circumstance, certainly you'd be doing a seminar. If you're 5 years out, probably not. You know, people will get at your technical competency a little bit differently. But at least there's an example there that you can use if you are asked for a research summary. So most of you have how many of you have done resumes? I assume every hand would go up. Okay, so then where we're at is whether there are things that you've heard about so far that could be used to refine your resumes, both in terms of structure and format, and that's where you may want to go next. Get your resume out, look at it, and see if it has the stuff on there that's important, and if it's done in a way, having had this course, in a way that appeals to you from that perspective. I'm just kind of going to move on because you're in a little bit different sort of position. So let's talk a little about places to locate jobs. This is also different than it was 40 years ago, but these are all suggestions of places that you might start to look. But the thing that's really going to be important is not so much that you go to electronic sources and you look for jobs that are posted. It's kind of important to remember somewhere between, we think, 50 and 90% of the jobs that get filled are never posted. They're filled by word of mouth. And this is where we want to get into talking a little about the network. So why would the world be that way? The reason is because, let's say I'm running a small business, I have 100 employees, I'm pretty busy as it stands. If I put an ad someplace and I get 500 resumes, it's a huge use of my overhead in order to try to screen those. So what will I do instead? You know, I'll call somebody I know in the business. I'll call my old professor. I'll call somebody else and say, hey, I need an IR spectroscopist. You know anybody who's looking for a job? You know anybody who wants to make a move? That sort of thing. And if the person I call says, no, I don't know anybody offhand, I'll say, well, okay, who else do you think I ought to talk to? Is there anybody else who I might ask? Now, what have I done here? First of all, I've asked if the person has any advice for me that can help me, and second, whether I got it or not, I've asked for another person to talk to. And so we're going to talk more about the network, but that's always going to be important part of your networking conversation. Is to make sure that you get another referral, somebody else to talk to. Who else can I talk to about this? Who would you suggest I talk to about it? But the point is, you won't go to a restaurant, you won't go to a movie, this is why Yelp exists, right? Because you'd like to have somebody else's opinion on stuff rather than walk in with no information. And it's the same way in hiring somebody for a job. If you can tell me, yeah, as a matter of fact, guy I used to work with in grad school is looking for something. Here's a little bit about him. Tell you what, if you like, I make an email introduction for you. You can see what you could do. That's how it happens. And how you network and the number of people who know your brand, the number of people who know your reputation, and how you've worked to expand that expands your, if you will, putting it on a nuclear basis, expands your cross-section for capture for these kinds of things. So there are lots of ways to start networking. Perhaps, one of the most valuable places to start is where you are right now. How many of you all know everyone in this room? That's a big place, I know, but I ask that same question in universities, people who are graduate students together, and never does a hand go up. And yet, that's one of the easiest places to meet people who are going to be out there the rest of your career. And this is, regardless of how it looks, this is a relatively small fraternity in whatever the part of the field you're in. I will give you a personal example. When I was in Indiana as a grad student, the people that I was there with, there were 4 ACS National Award winners. There were 2 of us that wound up with national or international offices in professional societies. There were chairs of departments, vice presidents of companies. And when we came to Indiana in 1975, 6, 7, 8, we looked like a bunch of grad students. You couldn't tell who was going to amount to something because it looked like none of us would. But the point is, and particularly here, there are stars all around you. This is an opportunity to meet people you're going to read about in CNN News 20 years from now. And it's also it's an opportunity for you to get to know people who 5 years out, you might need someone who can tell you who's looking for a job, or you might need someone who could give you a little advice about how you make an adjacent move in the field. There's nothing better than being able to pick up the phone and call somebody say, it seems to me you did this kind of work, and I need to do this. Can you give me 10 minutes on how to get started on this? It's tremendously useful. So I would recommend to you, meet as many people as you can here. To the extent that you can, get interested in their work and understand what they do and have them understand you. This is how your network starts, and it starts with the ground beneath your feet. You can also use your professional society, either in terms of local section or in terms of the divisions. From the perspective of the division, because you are professionals who have a bit of time and grade, you become more valuable to the divisions in terms of helping to organize programming or to do other things, and you'll meet people outside this organization who have similar interests because they're in similar fields. You can establish contacts other ways through your old professors, through the alumni association. Anybody, whether they're in the sciences or not, can be a part of your network because you don't always know what that next bit of information that you need is going to be. So meeting people and understanding what they do should become kind of second nature to you. There is, of course, a goal-oriented way of approaching this. If you go to a meeting, give yourself a goal of meeting 2 or 3 new people, of getting business cards and giving them. I realize a business card is an old school way of doing things, but the wonderful part of a business card is if you go to somebody's presentation and you see something interesting and you'd like some more information, you can walk up, introduce yourself, say what's important, say, could I give you a business card? Would you be willing to share this information with me? And then write down on the back what it is you want, and it's really easy for that person to get in contact with you. And it's as much as anything else, it's having something that shows that you were coming to the meeting prepared to meet people and extend that network. And to the extent that you can, if it's appropriate, you can ask for the opportunity to contact them, to say, would you mind, after have a look at this, I really was interested in this stuff. Could I send you an email afterwards? Could it be possible to talk to you about your work? And what that does is it establishes you as a presence, as a player, as someone with information that they can use as well, and the fact that you're interested in their work. That's also kind of important. So, particularly when I'm talking to grad students for whom getting a job is front and center for them, and I realize that's not necessarily front and center for all of you, the first thing that you have to tell people is networking is not about getting a job. Networking is about getting to know people and understanding what you can do for them and possibly what they can do for you. So there's an old saying that if you ask people for money, you get advice. if you ask people for advice, you get money. Now, that isn't totally true in either direction, but it's not totally untrue either. The kinds of things that you want to talk about in a networking conversation, you want to focus on the other person. Think about it. Any of you ever work in radio in undergraduate school? I did. So my approach to people is it's almost to interview them. It's to ask questions. It's to ask them questions that first of all inform me, but at the same time might have been interesting to my audience in the past. And as you do that, you're asking people about their work. Well, there is nothing so sweet to the human ear as the sound of his own voice. So it gives them the opportunity to tell you about the stuff. And you can it depends on the work. If you're seeing somebody from Dow, you can say, wow, this must have been an exciting time at Dow, this merger with DuPont. Are you feeling any of that? What does this mean to you? Some of the best things you can do is to ask, what do you really like about your job? What's fun about what you're doing? Because it immediately puts them where? It puts them thinking about having fun. So it puts them in a much more positive mindset. So you can you're doing this ultimately to build your network, but at the same time you're looking to learn about that company and learn about that person, and maybe if there's a position you can learn about that as well. One of the ways that I like to do this is to try to get people on the same side of the table with you instead of sitting across from one another. And here's what I mean by that. If I say, after having had this discussion, I say, here's what I'm trying to accomplish. I would like to be able to find a position kind of like yours doing this kind of thing. If you were in my position, what would you do? How would you approach this problem? So what have I done when I've asked that question? I haven't asked them for anything. I've said, I got a problem. Can you help me solve this? What you want to do is ask questions to which they don't feel compelled to tell you no. So if you ask for a job, if you ask, are there any jobs at your company? Then I'm in the position where maybe I have to tell you no. On the other hand, if you ask me a question that allows me to say, I don't know, that's a tough one. Have you tried? I mean, come on, you're scientists. People put a problem in front of you. This is exactly the way you approach it, isn't it? I mean, isn't this second nature to us that when somebody presents you with a problem, the first thing you try to do is help them solve it? So you do that in the same fashion with a networking conversation, particularly if you're looking for something. It doesn't have to be a job. I mean, it could be your work. It could be, I'm blocked in this. I don't know where to go with this. So let's say you're going to a meeting and you know that you're going to be at a mixer with people that you want to meet. Here's in particularly, let's take two cases. One case is where you're going to see people from a particular company or a particular laboratory, and you can prepare in advance. Well, here's some things that you can do to prepare. You can research the industry, and all this stuff can be available. This is all web kind of stuff, and it's pretty easy to get at. You can research the company. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff about companies. Companies love to tell you about what they do. You go to the website, you can find more stuff than you can possibly use. And you can also, if you know you're going to meet somebody, research the person. You can Google them. Now you got to be careful to make sure that you know that's the person that you're Googling. But what happens if you do that? Well, it gives you the basis to start a conversation with someone. Now, what you don't want to do is come in and say, I spent the last half an hour studying you on the internet. I know where your children live. That's perhaps a bit more aggressive, but it does give you an opportunity to ask questions that allow them to fill in details because you know enough to ask a smart question. That's what you're trying to do, is to get to the point of being able to ask somebody a smart question. Once again, more questions about, if you're talking about specifically a company or about a job or a person. These are, I mean, if you read these things, I realize I had to put them on a slide, but come on, this is just two human beings talking to one another. And it's really just about that simple. Pretend for the next 15 minutes you're interested in the person who's standing in front of you, and what would you say? I mean, you all know how to do that thing. So, in the career compass, as we get to the back, there are all kinds of sort of starter questions that you can ask if you know you're going to be in a situation to meet someone, to network with them. I would also, once again, I want to send you back to Elena Levine's book, because her approach to this is also to be providing something of value. Let's say you go someplace and you meet someone, you have an interesting conversation with them. Then there's an opportunity to follow up, and it doesn't have to be an ask. It can be a provide. 4 to 6 weeks later, if you have this person's card, if you enjoyed the conversation, if you think there's, that this is someone that you want to get a little closer to, send them an email. Find a reason to communicate with them. Saw this article, thought you might be interested. It's simply a way of kind of staying in front of them, providing something of value. Once again, you haven't asked for anything, but once again, it's a way of furthering a relationship. And it's not, and I hope it wouldn't be a relationship just toward the end of getting a job. It would be a relationship toward getting to know more people in the field. Janet and I talk about this all the time from an ACS basis. So when I don't know whether you feel the same way, but when I go to an ACS national meeting, I feel like there's about 1,000 people that I should be able to recognize, greet by their first name, and immediately snap back to the last conversation that I was having with them. Why is that? Well, it's because I'm interested in them. Yeah, there was a time when I was running for office and it meant something different. But it's because these are friends. These are my network. They do different stuff. Sometimes they do stuff that's interesting. Sometimes, they say they're going to have a local section meeting looking for a speaker, and I can volunteer. I mean, sometimes things just happen that way. But part of it is just getting to know people in the field and enjoying doing it. So we're not going to practice a networking conversation here because the geometry of this doesn't work. I'm going to recommend to you. I can tell you all I like about the importance of developing a network, but until you see it work, it doesn't become important to you. But I guarantee you that there is so much that happens because of how people know one another, and sometimes it takes 6 degrees of separation to get it done. There is so much that happens that way. I recommend getting to know other people in your field, and particularly starting with who's here. Okay. So we've come a long way today. Let's talk a little bit about what we did. We talked about the content of a resume. We talked about structure and function. We talked about the importance of an executive summary. We talked about how important it is to be able to flange that up with your elevator speech, and to some extent with a cover letter as well. We talked about ways that you can position the things that are important to you. Perhaps we also talked a little bit more, and something that I hope you will take away is how important it is to build a list of differentiators for you. And that goes to your personal brand. It goes to your brand, your attitude, and your reputation. And these are things that you will cultivate over the course of time. I'm going to stop there. We have a little time that we can take questions if you like. I hope this has been useful to you. This is an unusual audience for me because you are advanced enough that you've done this already. I hope I've given you something that you can use to tweak what you've got. Thank you. Thank you. Questions are welcome.